My wife and I were married for 10 years. I was my wife's first, and as I believed, her only sexual partner. We tied the knot when we were both 22 years old, and the incident that I'm about to share happened 10 years later when we were 32. My wife informed me that she was going on a vacation with her sister, but during the week she was away, her messages became strange and infrequent. I grew anxious about her well-being, and upon her return, her behavior only confirmed my fears. Just before the COVID-19 outbreak hit the United States, my wife mentioned feeling unwell and decided to schedule a doctor's appointment. However, she went to a second appointment without disclosing any details to me. Concerned about her health, I felt left in the dark and desperately wanted answers. So I searched her car for any appointment summaries or clues that could give me some insight. To my shock, I discovered an open STD test and a visit summary from her doctor revealing that she tested positive for herpes. My world began to crumble, and I was overwhelmed with emotions. I sat in her car for a while, staring at the trees around me, trying to process what I had just found. After discovering that my wife had tested positive for herpes, I knew that I could no longer be intimate with her. I felt scared and worried about my own health, so I decided to stay with my mother for a few days while waiting for my own test results. My wife seemed preoccupied with her own concerns and hardly noticed my absence. Thankfully, my results came back negative, meaning that I hadn't contracted the virus from her, nor had I passed it on to her. However, I still had concerns that needed addressing. I was frustrated that she hadn't informed me about her diagnosis, and I had many questions. Despite this, I realized that some answers were unnecessary, and my wife needed to confront the reality of the situation. Knowing how my wife contracted herpes wasn't a priority for me. What mattered was that she had it. During her vacation with her sister, they worked together in the same office, which gave me an idea. I received an email invitation to a work party, and it included the email addresses of my wife's colleagues and bosses. I took the opportunity to email them a picture of my wife's diagnosis and added a message that she had brought home a present from her vacation. The response was overwhelming. Before my wife could find out what I had done, her sister called me, asking what was going on. I told her everything. When her sister called me, she admitted that she hadn't been with my wife the whole time they were on vacation. Initially, she thought it was unfair of me to share my wife's private issue with her coworkers. However, after I expressed my frustrations to her and mentioned the possibility of divorce, she began to support my actions. Suddenly, my wife appeared outside and started banging on the car window. She looked furious and terrified, screaming and crying incoherent words. I got out of the car, and she began hitting me until I revealed that I knew she had cheated on me. At that point, she couldn't hold herself together. My wife was clearly overwhelmed and had probably not fully come to terms with her STD or her infidelity. When I revealed that I knew about her affair and the STD, she broke down in tears, trying to apologize and explain that she had used protection. But I wasn't willing to listen. I felt deeply betrayed, and I knew I could never be intimate with her again. Eventually, she went back inside defeated after I told her to pack her things and leave. Her sister, who had been on the phone during our confrontation, came over to help her pack and offer some words of encouragement about the future. My wife's motivation completely vanished when she tried to return to work. She was met with a barrage of backlash and shame from her coworkers for what she had done to me. Whether it was to her face or notes left on her desk, she was insulted, called out, and slandered. She could only endure one day of work before quitting. Her sister has been very quiet since then, and as far as I know, my wife still lives with her. I wouldn't be surprised if she's avoiding dating for a while or having trouble forgiving herself. As for me, I consider myself fortunate to have done my own investigation and to have separated myself from her while I figured out what I needed to know. In the end, I was able to dodge a bullet. I hope that she practices safe sex and discloses both her diagnosis and infidelity to her partners. I am deeply sorry for what happened to you, OP. Your wife's actions were extremely disrespectful and breached the trust you had in her. It will be difficult for her to overcome the mistake she made. You trusted her when you let her go on vacation without you, but she took advantage of that trust by having sexual relations with another man. It's a form of cosmic justice that she contracted an STD. It's fortunate that she didn't try to initiate sexual contact with you before you found out about what happened. You definitely avoided a disastrous outcome. It's a relief to know that she couldn't conceal her diagnosis and was forced to confront the shame she deserved for cheating on her husband. Any woman who thinks she needs someone else to love her needs a serious wake-up call. True love is meant to be between two people who communicate openly and choose to love each other unconditionally, instead of taking advantage of their partner's trust. Op, I wish you all the best. You made the right decision by investigating and finding out the truth. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's move on to the second story of the day. Last Valentine's Day marked the end of my 7-year marriage with my 33-year-old wife. She was supposed to finish work at 5 p.m., but at 4:50 p.m., she sent me a text saying that her aunt had a date for Valentine's Day, and since she had trouble finding dates, she felt obligated to babysit her kids for her. I suggested that I could meet her there, but she told me it wasn't necessary. Her aunt was uncomfortable with men being at her house because her children were recovering from their abusive father, who had been out of the picture for some time. This conversation really upset me, but I decided to be just as selfless as my wife on this special day. Initially, I believed her story for about an hour. However, things changed when she posted a status update revealing her location. She made sure to block me and our mutual friends from seeing it, but she overlooked one person, her 15-year-old cousin, the child she was supposed to be babysitting. The cousin actually messaged me to ask how I was doing and shared some troubling news. The cousin showed me a screenshot of my wife's status and location, which indicated that she was having a lovely Valentine's Day at a fancy restaurant. The cousin was quite observant and noticed that my wife didn't tag me or include a photo of us together, which was unusual. Due to these inconsistencies, she suspected that something was amiss and decided to inform me. I didn't disclose to the cousin that my wife had used her as a cover-up for the babysitting lie, but I thanked her instead. Afterward, I checked the family locator app, which we never argued about. Since my wife's phone wasn't at the restaurant she claimed to be at, and we were always together, I decided to dig a little deeper. I messaged one of my wife's coworkers on Facebook to inquire if she knew anything. She immediately revealed that something was likely happening between my wife and a colleague from the office. She mentioned that they would exchange work documents at each other's cubicles, but she suspected that they were actually passing handwritten notes. Additionally, she mentioned that they ate lunch together in the small office kitchen every day. It appeared that my wife and her colleague were attempting to conceal their relationship and portray themselves as nothing more than coworkers. I was surprised by how easy it was to gather information from people. Had I been oblivious all along? Although I couldn't check my wife's phone, I informed her coworker about my wife's fabricated Valentine's Day story and her current location in a different neighborhood. The coworker asked if she was at Sunny Day Development, which stunned me as it was the exact location where App, the colleague, lived. Apparently, my wife was at his house. I remembered showing her that spot once during a party. My wife's icon hovered over the neighborhood, and she said it was definitely close enough to be his house. I had enough. I thanked her and got off social media. I started throwing my wife's clothes and belongings out the window. Loose clothes were strewn all over the yard and roof. It started raining before she got home, and I thought karma was just giving me an extra hand. I wrote a note to put on our front door that read Happy Valentine's Day. Don't bother coming back ever again. When she got home late, I could hear her screaming and freaking out. She pounded on the door and repeatedly rang the doorbell, but I had barricaded myself inside. I could hear her talking on the phone with her mother and father, and it seemed like they were surprised that she was locked out of her own house with her clothes strewn across the yard. She insisted that she didn't know why this was happening, but eventually she broke down and admitted to lying about having a date with someone else. She had asked her father for help in moving her belongings elsewhere. I could only imagine that her parents questioned her motives, but all she could say was that she didn't know. She had refrained from telling me about the situation as she feared my reaction. When she finally disclosed what had happened over the phone with her father, she sounded remorseful and ashamed of her actions, like a pitiful little girl who had made a grave mistake by lying and cheating on her spouse, thinking she could get away with it. Her father arrived to help her, and I stepped outside to confront them both. I told them that I had learned of her infidelity while she was away, and despite her tearful denials and accusations of exaggeration, I challenged her to prove me wrong by showing me her messages with the other person involved. I confronted her about the other person involved, and her face turned pale when I mentioned his real name. Despite her denial of having any messages with him, I could sense her father's disappointment, and I asked him if he believed that she was lying. He hesitated, feeling embarrassed, but eventually agreed with me. This caused her to start screaming and wailing, eventually dropping to the ground. I sternly told her to gather herself because she was an adult who made the conscious decision to cheat on me and deceive me on Valentine's Day. Now she had to face the consequences of her actions. Her devastation was evident, and I could sense that she didn't want our marriage to end that night. Although she didn't want our marriage to end, she made the decision not to return to our home, leaving behind her beloved dog without the opportunity to say goodbye. Fortunately, we never had children because it would have been even more heartbreaking. Her actions serve as a lesson to others to carefully consider the consequences of betraying the trust of the person who matters most in their life. Every action has its own set of repercussions, and she had to face the consequences of hers. She stayed with her parents for some time, but they were extremely disappointed and skeptical of her words. She was not allowed to leave her parents' house unless it was for work. And even then, she had to return promptly as any delay was unacceptable. I'm sorry to hear about your wife's betrayal on Valentine's Day. Although it's just like any other day, the fact that it's associated with true love makes it even more hurtful. I'm relieved that you were able to uncover the truth through your investigation. It's fortunate that the person your wife used in her lie came forward, unaware of her involvement in the deception. Your ex-wife turned a kind gesture into a falsehood that was difficult to accept. It's impossible to sustain a relationship built on such a foundation of dishonesty. It's difficult to even imagine how one could have a healthy relationship with your ex after what she did. She needs to mature and understand the value of loyalty and honesty in a relationship. Without those qualities, she doesn't deserve the benefits of a romantic partnership. Despite the difficulty, you made the right decision to distance yourself from her. I wish you the best of luck moving forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Take care.